You're listening to the December 11th, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. Today's interview is with Raz Rafaeli, the CEO of Secret Double Octopus, and we talk about their security approach, which employs secret sharing, eliminating the need for cryptographic keys, and providing protection that information theory has postulated is unbreakable. This podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. A little bit later, we'll be having that interview with Secret Double Octopus. But before we get into that, we're going to start by getting into the week's top cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions. So we'll start off with the cybercrime events with Matt.
Yeah, guys, coming in at number 3 this week, and this has been in the news over the last month, but it involves the Georgia Secretary of State. In a massive data breach, the state of Georgia released the personal data of more than 6 million registered voters. That's old news, though. More current news, there's an investigation that's been going on, and in the investigation, it was found that it was a clerical error was the cause for the breach. The Georgia Secretary of State actually fired the employee for the mistake. However, the employee that was fired is disputing the claim, saying that they were not responsible for the release of information. We'll find out more details about that report because it's actually due to come out at some point Friday. Coming in at number 2, we have JD Wetherspoon. JD Wetherspoon is a popular UK-based pub chain, and they recently acknowledged that they had about 650,000 of their customers' personal data compromised. The information included names, email addresses, birth dates, and phone numbers. A very limited amount of those customers actually had their payment card information obtained, which is about only 100 or so. The breach actually took place back in June, but was just recently discovered on December 1st. And coming in at number 1 this week, we have a bank in the United Arab Emirates. A hacker going by the name of, what do you think that is, Jeff? You think that's Bubba? Bubba? I'm going to go with Bubba.
I like Bubba better just because, like Forrest Gump.
We'll go with Bubba, guys. A hacker going by the name of Bubba breached the network of Invest Bank, which is a bank in Sharjah. The hacker demanded a $3 million ransom to keep the hacker from releasing the files he was able to steal from the database. That's old news. What's new news is that this bank, obviously, they didn't pay the ransom, and the hacker kept true to his word and released the personal information of several customers of the bank. The customers were only alerted about this compromise of information after they were contacted by a newspaper. The bank itself actually didn't tell the customers. So that'd be a heck of a way to find out that all your information is posted online. Those are the top 3 trending industry targets of the week. Our first discussion today, guys, Jeff has done an awesome job rounding up some information on some big DDoS attacks that took place this week. So I'll kind of let Jeff kick us off on that.
Yeah, there wasn't really, like a massive new breach or anything that popped up in the news. I was just trying to look for what everyone was talking about, and it seemed like a lot of the stuff that was getting talked about was DDoS attacks. Janet, which is the academic computer network in the UK, they were down for a couple days earlier this week due to a DDoS attack, and that seemed to get a lot of coverage. So universities across the UK on Monday and Tuesday were down. And a lot of students I saw on Twitter and social media were, quite upset about it because I think for some universities in the UK at least, it's like getting towards the end of, the end of terms or whatever they call it over there. Everyone's got to submit their deadlines and do all the things like that, and they couldn't because of the disruptions. So that was kind of a big deal because it affected a lot of people. But I believe it is over now. I saw on the Facebook page while I was looking earlier today, there was an update. It said that they've now put blocks in place to stop the attacks, and they're working effectively, and no customers have been impacted since Tuesday at 2 p.m., although further attacks are still being attempted. So they're still trying to disrupt the network, but apparently they've managed to stop it so far.
One question I've always had about DDoS when it comes to education, because you do see this quite a bit, in universities will suffer a DDoS attack. I get the I get what happens if you DDoS like an online retailer. Like there's significant financial loss with that. But when you're DDoSing like a university or something like that, it's a pain in the butt. But what do you think they're really after? Because like let's say you prolong like a student from like finishing a homework assignment, they'll probably just give like a longer term and say like, okay, now you have till this day to turn in your paper or something like that.
That was my thought too, hey, maybe it's, some students who's trying to buy a couple extra days. But it seems like if you're going to spend all that time DDoSing, just sit down and do the paper. So I don't know if that really lines up.
Just sit down and finish your paper. Like you'd surprise yourself. You might actually get your paper done by the time you pull off the DDoS attack.
Before this attack on this Janet academic network in the UK, there was an attack on basically like the DNS system that helps run the internet. There's 13 internet root name servers. And some unknown entity carried out an, quote, enormous DDoS attack against these root name servers, flooding them with traffic. The servers are receiving more than 5 million queries per second and more than 50 billion queries in total during the 2-day period. Basically, there's 13 of these servers. They're named A through M, and they're operated by different organizations in the world, such as ICANN, the U.S. Army, etc. Not all the root receivers received the roughly 5 million queries per second, but it was enough to flood network connections and cause timeouts in the B, C, G, and H root servers. The Register went on to kind of explain basically what they thought this attack meant, and they said, due to the internet's design, the servers themselves see a comparatively low amount of traffic, especially if you compare it to something like Google. And if you even were to take all of them offline, it would not really cause immediate problems for the wider internet, since the information they store and share is held by many thousands of other servers. That said, any attack on the DNS infrastructure is taken very seriously, and if those servers were to go down for, say, longer than a day, the Register says that it would start causing significant problems globally.
Yeah, staying with this topic, Akamai just released their State of the Internet report. The number of DDoS attacks recorded in the third quarter of this year has grown by 180% compared to quarter 3 of 2014. So there's been a lot more attacks, but the report found that the attacks were shorter in duration. They had lower bandwidth and smaller volumes compared to the attacks at the same period last year during the quarter. Just some other key points. The average attack detected during the quarter still lasted about 18.86 hours, but that was a drop from 22.36 hours just last year. The number of 100-plus gigabyte per second attacks has dropped from 17 in the third quarter of 2014 to just 8 in the same quarter of 2015. Half of all DDoS attacks were against gaming sites, which actually makes a lot of sense. Jeff and I have talked about that quite a bit so far this year, with software and technology firms combining to tally another 25% of those attacks. And lastly, DDoS reflection, which is a technique that was used in only 6% of attacks in quarter 3 of 2014, was responsible for a third of the attacks this quarter of this year.
I was looking at that report earlier today as well, and I think they were kind of speculating, a few news outlets as well as the report itself is speculated on some of the, I guess, sort of takeaways or why that sort of shifted. And they said that the increased use of a lot of these boot or stressor services, if people remember, like Lizard Squad, they had their stressor service, which is basically just like a DDoS service. I think they call it a stressor service so they can say it's legitimate. But they were speculating that there's been an increase in that the use of these tools is responsible for the more frequent but less powerful attacks. These services rely less on computers that have been infected with malware and combined into a big botnet, and instead rely more on the abuse of misconfigured services and devices that use protocols. And then another takeaway they had was that smaller companies' websites are increasingly at risk due to the rising popularity and ease of these DDoS for hire services. And we've seen that. We've talked about that the past couple podcasts as well. The Armada Collective is doing these DDoS extortion attacks. There's the DDoS for Bitcoin campaign before then. I think that's kind of why we saw that maybe a shift towards more but less powerful attacks.
Yeah, I wonder how big, you'll see a hacktivist group brag about they'll pull off a DDoS attack, and then you'll see someone in the cybersecurity field, will be like, yeah, you pull off this DDoS attack, but it wasn't very powerful. But is it when I look at that, when we're talking about gigabytes per second, stuff like that, does it really matter if it was a successful attack? That's a question that always comes to my mind. Like, yeah, so they weren't able to get like this 100 gigabyte per second attack mark or something like that, but if it still took the network offline, does it really matter?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the goal, obviously, is to deny service. So if they're denying service, then I would say that they succeeded. I've seen so many times where they say, oh, we're doing these 100 gigabit per second attacks, and then it turns out, I interview someone from like Encapsula about it, and they're just like, oh, no, it's not the case at all.
Yeah, it's not the case at all. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and just like with these numbers from Akamai, I just think we should point out that this is based on numbers from them. So obviously their data changes depending on the customers they have.
That's still a pretty good sample, though, I think. Moving on, Jeff and I this week, last week, I should say, we talked about the dark web a little bit. Jeff and I are kind of both going to be writing a report on some dark web content for Surfwatch Labs. And so while we were going through the news, we saw this update from Kaspersky Lab. And according to a report from Kaspersky Lab, cybercriminals are cutting back on their activities due to the rising costs of developing and distributing malware. One thing that Jeff and I have found fascinating when we've been on the dark web and been having some help with that and searching around, and we're both really impressed with, and maybe impressed is the wrong word, but we were kind of shocked with the customer service side of this. And where I'm going with that is it's a real business. And this report from Kaspersky Lab really kind of goes over that because the reason that cyber criminals are cutting back on some of their activities are because of the costs of developing some of this malware. Kaspersky Lab revealed that the number of new malware files its products detected every day reached 310,000, which was a fall of 15,000 from 2014's total, as such attacks reach a saturation point. According to Kaspersky Lab, this means cybercriminals are using, quote, less expensive means to continue their attacks, which, makes a lot of sense. If you can get the same result with a cheaper tool, you would totally do that. And that's what cybercriminals
Well, yeah, and we talk about that all the time, too, on the podcast. You see all these reports, and usually, although every time a company is breached, they always say it was a sophisticated cyber attack. It's, usually it's just a phishing attack, and they didn't have their software updated, and it was some simple exploit.
Yeah, there are some advanced tools out there, but I mean, if you have a member of an organization that clicks on a link, that's all it took. Like you don't have to spend all this money to make an email look like a good representation of something that a person would click on.
Well, yeah, we saw I believe it was like the Apple phishing. You could buy an Apple phishing page. I think it was pretty cheap, wasn't it? Just like $15 or something.
I think it was like 50. I don't even think it was $15, Jeff.
Yeah, maybe it was like $5. It was very cheap. You could just go on the dark web and spend a couple bucks and get a pretty good looking phishing page for Apple products and stuff.
Yep, Apple logo and everything. This avenue of approach that, according to Kaspersky Lab, this avenue of approach that the cybercriminals are taking is working, and it's actually contributed to a 5% increase of cybercrime towards victims this year. The head of anti-malware for Kaspersky Lab said this about this new phenomenon, quote, "Today, malware is created, bought, and resold for specific tasks. The commercial malware market has settled and is evolving towards simplification. I think we will no longer see malicious code for the code. This trend is also observed among the operators of targeted attacks," end quote. When we're talking about like rootkits and replicating viruses, they're still popular, and it's a method that cybercriminals use, but they're very expensive. Not only do these cybercriminals have to worry about, coming up for the money and, taking the time to develop them, sophisticated antivirus software is specifically designed to take out these new threats. So it's all just very complicated. It's very costly. It takes a lot of time. So cybercriminals are essentially just steering away from that. They're just using your really tried and true methods and cheaper ways to exploit victims, and it is working.
We'll move on and we'll hit some of the top cybercrime advisories that we saw this week. There was a freelance IT security consultant, and he found that a majority of Dutch citizens who own a mobile phone are vulnerable to hackers. The company that provides services to these phone carriers is called Phonehouse, and he discovered that all the phone house employees have access to the customer data of all the Dutch telecoms at any dealer point, making the security of Dutch phone customers unsecure, because I believe he went into one of these stores and he saw, some employees basically not following good security hygiene and, had their passwords and stuff exposed, and he could basically, if he wanted to, could have basically stole those passwords and got in and accessed all this data. So he was just kind of making a point of how it's pretty thin security-wise there.
Yeah, and it's no big deal. It just affected 12 million people. It's no big deal. Just go ahead and throw that stuff out there, guys.
It wasn't actually a breach or anything. It was just that, the easy potential that he saw. So it was kind of a good reminder. You need to make sure all your employees are practicing good security hygiene.
Next, we have whaling scams. You guys have heard of this before, maybe not necessarily that term. Senior financial staff members are continuously being targeted by scammers who are attempting to trick them into carrying out large wire transfer payments. The FBI recently issued a warning to organizations about this threat. Scammers attempt to trick organizations by creating emails that appear to be from a targeted company's CEO, and they're asking the recipient of the email, which is usually, like we said, a senior financial staff member, to carry out an urgent wire transfer. And I think we've actually, Jeff, have gone over a few cases of this before.
Yeah, we talked about it before. The FBI, I believe, calls it a business email compromise, and we talked about it a couple of podcasts in a row. And I just thought, definitely worth mentioning again, because a lot of times you mention a big threat and then we don't really talk about it much again, but that's one of the big things that still affecting organizations. I've never heard this term whaling scams before, but it's kind of interesting because Kevin Epstein, when he interviewed him a long time ago about phishing, he was talking about how he basically described it as tuna fishing instead of, going for these little guys. They're going for the big guys like the CEOs and going for these big payouts. And now we have another one calling them whaling scams, so everyone's doing the whole play on words for fish. and then a couple other advisories. Microsoft they're always in the news, and there was a couple advisories related to Microsoft. If you're an Xbox Live user like I am, shout out to the new Star Wars game. Microsoft is warning some Xbox Live users about potential man-in-the-middle attacks after the company accidentally leaked users' private keys. So essentially a scammer could impersonate the .xbox Live domain to intercept the website's secure connection. In this scenario, a user would be giving the scammer personal information rather than Microsoft, which is how man-in-the-middle works. You think you're giving it to Microsoft, but you're actually giving it to somebody else. And then we talked about this, I remember, a while ago, talking about ATMs becoming vulnerable to cyber attacks when the Windows XP support comes to an end. And Microsoft has announced that as of January 2016, so coming up pretty quick, no further security patches will be issued for the software. Windows XP is used at ATMs throughout the world, and researchers are saying that malware installation and DDoS attacks top the list of expected vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and then lastly, we have a couple of payment card advisories. Starting off, we're going to talk about Nemesis malware. FireEye reported the discovery of a malware that is designed to steal payment card data and is very difficult to detect and remove. According to FireEye, the Nemesis malware is being utilized by Fin1, which is a Russian cybercrime group. Nemesis is a bootkit. The malware is installed on lower-level operating system components, and according to FireEye, even if the operating system is reinstalled, the malware can remain in place. So kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. Merry Christmas. And our last advisory for this week's podcast, we have a report that is indicating that there were some major companies that are exposing customer credit cards. According to this report from Wandera, 16 major companies around the world, which includes 4 major airlines, exposed customer credit card information when customers were making commercial transactions. The problems exist in the company's lack of HTTPS encryption for mobile versions of company websites and mobile applications. According to the report, researchers from Wandera had, quote, no difficulty obtaining personally identifiable information and even credit card numbers from commercial transactions initiated via both the mobile website and the mobile apps.
Yeah, so those were the major cybercrime advisories that stood out in Surfwatch Labs data. Now coming up, we'll move on to some of the legal stuff. As always, a lot of legal stuff happening. There was a couple of developments in both the EU and the United States in terms of cybercrime laws. Earlier just this week, the European Union signed off on some new rules for cybersecurity. The Parliament's rapporteur, Andreas Schwab, he said that, quote, "Today a milestone has been achieved. We have agreed on the first ever EU-wide cybersecurity rules, which the Parliament has advocated for years." He went on to say that Parliament has pushed hard for a harmonized identification of critical operators in energy, transport, health, or banking fields, which will have to fulfill security measures and notify significant cyber incidents. He also said that member states will have to cooperate more on cybersecurity, which is even more important in light of the current security situation in Europe. A lot going on over there. The proposed laws were agreed by the MEPs and ministers from 28 EU countries. And these laws will also, in addition to critical infrastructure, they're going to apply to some tech firms as well. So I saw a press release today, and they said that in the press release that some internet service providers, such as online marketplaces like eBay and Amazon, search engines like Google, as well as cloud providers, are also going to have to ensure the safety of their infrastructure and report on major incidents. But they also said in the press release that micro and small digital companies will get an exemption, according to the deal. So it's pretty big news, but it's not immediate. As the BBC reported, the deal still needs approval from the European Parliament and national governments, and that vote is expected to take place in the spring, after which member states would have around 2 years to put those measures in place. So, we still got to get the final vote and then a couple years to implement it. So it's not exactly like suddenly it's happening.
Yeah, here in the United States, we actually have some bills that are being discussed as well. Recently, the House Financial Services Committee, by a 46-9 vote, approved on December 9th the Data Security Act of 2015, which would establish minimum security protections at businesses, as well as create a national requirement for data breach notification.
Yeah, man, I saw that and I was reading up on it right before the podcast, and I got a little chuckle out of it because I guess, no really surprise, but the Credit Union National Association President Jim Nussle, so he said in a statement that this bill will prevent breaches by providing a higher standard for who will accept payments, provide better notification procedures, and a federal law that will replace the cumbersome patchwork of state laws. And then he went on to say that until retailers adhere to the same standards that financial institutions are beholden to, millions of customers will remain at risk. So I'm reading this article, it was on a credit union website, and it's all praising this. And then I switch over to The Hill, and their headline is "Retailers Paying Cyber Bills as Holiday Assault Looms." So it's kind of like, two kind of different views on it. So The Hill wrote about the retailers that this act has faced fierce pushback from them, and that these retailers are warning that it would be overly burdensome to some smaller businesses while allowing other companies, such as third-party vendors and financial institutions, to escape regulation altogether. So it's kind of like the same thing we see all the time when we talk about, payment card breaches, or we talk about the chip and pin stuff. It's always sort of like the banks versus the retailers, and, it appears this law is kind of breaking down into those two factions as well. Yeah, one quick note that I wanted to tell all of our listeners. We talk on this podcast all the time about, the legal implications of a breach. And Surfwatch Labs is actually hosting a webcast on that. I believe it's next week on December 15th. So yeah, next Tuesday, Surfwatch Labs, they're hosting a webcast. The title of the webcast is "The Legal Reality of a Cybersecurity Breach." And they're going to talk about, who has accountability for cybersecurity, your company's potential liability after a data breach, regulatory and best practice guidance, and how cyber threat intelligence can help you mitigate breaches before it's too late. Our own Adam Meyer, we talk about him sometimes on the podcast. He's one of the speakers. And then also Aran Kahana, he's a special counselor for Maslon LLP. He's going to be on as a guest as well, talking about some of those issues. So if you enjoy this part of the podcast where we talk about legal stuff, we'll put a link in the podcast description.
All right, so getting into lawsuits, we had this was a really interesting one. The highly cited case between Wyndham Hotels and Resorts and the Federal Trade Commission finally saw a resolution as the hotel chain agreed to settle charges. Under the terms of the settlement, the company will establish a comprehensive information security program designed to protect cardholder data, including payment card numbers, names, and expiration dates. In addition, the company is required to conduct annual information security audits and maintain safeguards and connections to its franchisees' servers. Wyndham Hotels wrote in a statement, quote, "We are pleased to reach this settlement with the FTC, which does not hold Wyndham liable for any violations, nor require Wyndham to pay any monetary relief." The company went on to say, "This settlement resolves these issues and sets a standard for what the government considers reasonable data security of payment card information." And I think the big thing here, Jeff, wasn't Wyndham has to adhere to these things, but that they didn't have to pay a fine, right?
So they don't have to pay a settlement or a fine or anything, but according to the FTC press release, they say that Wyndham's obligations under this settlement are in place for 20 years, so there is, that extended period of, increased watch, from the FTC. But yeah, like you said, no fine at all. Another interesting legal action was this insider theft case. Mercedes-Benz is suing one of their Formula One engineers over claims of data theft. So Mercedes-AMG high-performance powertrains, they're suing this employee, and in the court document, it says that the employee intends to join Ferrari after his Mercedes contract expires. So he works for Mercedes, his contract goes through December. So according to the documents, the employee searched for and saved files, including a race report, mileage and damage, data relating to Mercedes F1 engines, and files containing code required to decrypt raw race data files. So according to a Bloomberg article, they said that Mercedes is seeking the return of all the documents and information, payment of its legal fees, and they also want to block the employee from joining Ferrari or any other F1 competitor until after the 2016 season.
Next, we have a patent case between Samsung and Apple. According to court filings last week, Samsung has agreed to pay $548 million to Apple as part of a long-standing patent case. As the BBC reported, they said the payment is part of a bigger $1 billion damages award that Apple was granted in 2012 by a jury that considered the case. The total was reduced on appeal to $930 million. To me, apples and oranges, whatever. Further legal action split this total into two parts: a $548 million chunk for technology patents and a $382 million chunk for allegations that Samsung copied Apple's packaging materials. Samsung reserved the right to recoup the money if further developments in the case impact the ruling.
And that case has been going on forever, and from what I read, there's still more cases to come. I think there's another, they said there's something like there's a fourth jury trial set, I think, in the spring, and, there's obviously more stuff going on. So it's basically the never-ending patent case between Samsung and Apple. And then another story, we've talked about breaches at LexisNexis a few times. This story doesn't necessarily have to do with the data breach, but the Fourth Circuit Court has upheld a $13.5 million class action against LexisNexis. So this $13.5 million class action settlement, what it does is it alleges that LexisNexis Risk and Information Analytics Group violated the Fair Credit and Reporting Act because it sold reports to debt collectors without first obtaining user certification. So they upheld a district court ruling which certified the settlement class and approved the settlement, but now what happened is a group of class members is claiming the right to opt out of that settlement by the district court, and they wanted to pursue the statutory damages individually, and they wanted to basically undo that $13.5 million settlement. But this Fourth Circuit Court upheld the district court's ruling, saying that we find no error in the release of statutory damage claims and no abuse of discretion in the court's approval of the settlement agreement. So basically, they just upheld that $13.5 million class action for essentially violating the Fair Credit and Reporting Act.
On our last, what we're going to call legal tidbits, we have a botnet that was disrupted, more Silk Road news, and a guilty plea by a linen company. First of all, we're going to start off with the Dorkbot botnet. You can't even make that up.
There's so many jokes running through the back of my mind.
Yeah, right. A collaboration between tech firms and law enforcement agencies has led to the disruption of the popular Dorkbot malware family, which has previously infected numerous computers in over 190 countries. Moving on real quick, more Silk Road news. We've talked about this quite a bit. We've talked about there were some corrupt agents that were involved with the investigation and everything. Charges were unsealed against Roger Thomas Clark, alleged confidant of Silk Road operator Ross Albright. Clark was arrested in Thailand and is pending extradition to the United States. Additionally, a judge sentenced former Secret Service agent Sean Bridges to 71 months in prison for stealing money while investigating the site. The judge also ordered that Bridges forfeit $165,000 from Fidelity Brokerage, $306,000 held in trust, and $4,000 from a PNC bank account.
General Linen Services of Somersworth, New Hampshire, they pled guilty basically to gaining unauthorized access to their competitor's server and downloading approximately 1,100 of their invoices, and then they use those invoices in sale efforts to kind of basically try to steal their competitors' clients. The defendant is scheduled to be sentenced on March 26, 2016, and faces a maximum sentence of 5 years probation and up to a $500,000 fine. Yeah, so that wraps up all the legal news and tidbits and cyber advisories and cyber events and everything that basically happened this week. Before we move on to our interview with the CEO of the awesomely named Secret Double Octopus, we have our funny story of the week. Did you find anything interesting this week, Matt?
I got a pretty good one. I got a chuckle out of this one. Technology is constantly making our lives easier. In this specific example of technology, it even helped a woman to tell the truth. Kathy Bernstein, who's a 57-year-old woman from Florida, was fined and arrested for her involvement in 2 separate hit-and-run accidents that occurred on the same day. Bernstein initially struck a truck while driving. She fled the scene, only to hit the back of a silver car just 5 miles up the road while she was fleeing. In both accidents, her internet-connected black Ford automobile informed its emergency services operator that the car was involved in an accident, in both cases. Well, she lied and said that a car drove out in front of her and she slammed on the brakes. In both cases, that's what she said. The operator told her the car would not call them unless she was in an accident. Shortly after police were dispatched to her house, they saw a black Ford automobile. The front end was completely damaged. All the airbags were deployed. When they questioned her about it, she said that she hit a tree, but later she would eventually admit to the 2 hit and runs. So they both occurred within 5 miles of each other in the same day. So don't lie about that stuff anymore. If you're going to have one of these internet-connected cars, they can do a lot. They monitor quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting when your own vehicle is tattling on you now.
Yeah, what do they say? What do they say about snitches? Don't they get stitches or something like that?
All right, now coming up, we have our interview with Raz Rafaeli, the CEO of Secret Double Octopus, and we talk about their approach to security, which employs this concept of secret sharing. I first heard of you guys last month, and I want to get into what you guys do and encryption and all that in a minute. But first, I'm sure you guys get asked this a lot. Where did you get a name like Secret Double Octopus?
That's a great question. I will start and tell you that sometimes when we talk to potential customer and partners, we give this as a quiz, and say, guys, this is the name. At the end of the session, please let us know what is the meaning of this name, why we selected it. But to make this fairly open, the name, what we do basically, just on the nutshell, we come to the encryption market with something very disruptive and very different. And the way that we do encryption, security is not through encryption. And I believe that I will answer your question soon after you hear more what we do. But the idea to the name came from the academy. The company is based on research that has been made in Ben-Gurion University by 2 professors, Shlomo Dolev and Dr. Shimri Tzur. And they came us with the original idea of an IP, and the name was part of it. Originally we were very excited about the name, but we didn't know if this can catch up. And we started to meet with companies and customers, and everybody told us this is the coolest name they ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept the name, and I guess that within 5 minutes down the path, you will understand why it's this name.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get into, I guess, what you guys do. I was reading on your website, it said Secret Double Octopus does not require encryption keys or certificate authorities. So just, if you could explain, I guess, where you guys fit into the picture.
Look, what's happened today, if you look a little bit what's happening the last, I would say, 20, 25 years, we see that more and more devices are connected to the internet. If you look 25 years, you probably saw mainly mainframes connected to the internet, and some people work from terminals. Later on, the personal computer appears, but again, simply people use them for send emails. Later on, some website appears, etc., etc. But what is happening now, when every kid holds a cell phone, or mobile phone, or a smartphone, and every device, starting from light bulbs or even the refrigerator, connect to the internet, and they all, guess what? They all communicate and send secure information or sensitive information. And what's happening, although there are many, many companies today that try to protect what I call the endpoint. This is 95% of these startups or the initiatives in cybersecurity try to protect the endpoint, the cell phone, the server, the perimeter from malicious attacks, from any kind of malicious code that penetrate there. And there's many, many companies that offer different kind of ways to block, to forecast, to protect these attacks. Some of them has machine learning or other techniques. You walk at RSA, you see 300 companies communicating absolutely the same messages, but you don't know what exactly they do. But again, between these endpoints, the growing number of endpoints, nothing has really changed on the security, the way that people conduct security. And while the encryption keys and certificates were good for 40 years, 30 years, and maybe 20 years ago, now with the new environment of IoTs and even mobile banking and others, these are not applicable anymore. And why is that? Because the way that encryption keys work today, you take a key, you encrypt your entire data, and you send it out from your organization, from your cell phone, from your computer, from your laptop to somewhere. And you believe that everything is secure. But if someone gets the entire data, even the encrypted data, and gets somehow the key, the entire secure data is revealed. And since people know that, there's lots of attacks on how to get keys from moving data, from certificate authorities. And the problem is that while that is fairly popular, when you come to IoT, for instance, and you need to stamp every device that you manufacture, the PKI infrastructure is not applicable because you need to work in a heterogeneous environment with millions of devices manufactured by multiple vendors. And now you cannot go ahead and stamp every device with the key because every key needs to work in any environment. And there is a real problem. So if you take what's happening in the IoT, but you move back to what's happening in the mobile banking, you will find yourself in a way that you hold probably a smartphone. You try to connect to your bank. The bank knows that I am Raz because he gives me multi-factor authentication. But I have no clue that I'm connected to the bank or maybe to a fisher. And when I am trying to connect to the bank and serve, hey, there's a lot of vulnerabilities. Someone can hit that, and someone, of course, can of course play man in the middle or other attacks on my data. And even when you go to the large companies, you find that every large company understands that the PKI management is a huge headache. Every big company holds today 100,000 of keys. From security perspective or from insurance perspective, this is very costly because, the value of certificates is about $1,000 for an organization. Just try to multiply that by the number of hundreds of thousands of keys and see how big is threat. So this is the environment today. And we came to that environment and said, hey guys, we cannot do more of the same like all other companies. How can we address all these needs of enterprise, mobile, IoT with a different approach? And the approach that we took is not to try to come with a better encryption. Okay, I have 128, he has 256, maybe I'll come with something stronger, because everything is breakable. The people that invented the RSA told us today there is no security. So what we came with an idea is, instead of making the life of the attacker more complicated to break the encrypted data, let's come with an approach that will never give the attacker enough information to attack. So think about it. If every time the attacker will try to attack your data and if it never gets enough information to attack and get anything tangible, hey, now we have a different type of security. And the way that we do that is, instead of taking the data and encrypting with the key and send it over from one place to another, we split the data into shares, and this is useless shares, and I'll talk to you later on how to do it. And each share is useless. It's garbage. You cannot break it, even the entire computer power in the world. And we send these shares over multiple routes from one place to another. So just to give you an example, if you have a fax machine, you like to take a fax machine from your office to someone else, let's say in Israel and another place. So you put the paper in the fax, and the fax goes all the way to the other machine. Think about another option where the fax will go into a shredder, and each shred will fly all over somehow from one place to another, and only at the very end it will be unshredded, and you get the document. So if you try to attack any shred, you get nothing basically. But only in the very end, everything becomes safely. So this is the basic approach that we took. We use the network as a security and not an encryption as protecting of data. Is this clear?
Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, like we hear the example all the time of a person in the Starbucks, they're accessing their work files over Wi-Fi. So you're saying that would stop a man-in-the-middle attack. I guess my thought is, how is that better than, say, like a VPN? And wouldn't the person who's doing the man-in-the-middle attack be able to get all those shredded strands at once before they leave? If that makes sense?
Yes, great question. I tell you, you're absolutely right. If I'm sitting at Starbucks and I got the password to the Wi-Fi, the attacker gets the same password to the same Wi-Fi as well. And you can, of course, jump on that and, of course, try to get information from my computer. That's obviously you're right about what you say. But when we come to Starbucks with our solution on my laptop, what we do, we run our software, and at the same time, we spread the data into shares and work in parallel, both through the Wi-Fi and through the cellular at the same time. But again, since we work, some information goes on the Wi-Fi and some other information goes on the cellular, the attacker never gets enough information to attack me. So if I am sitting under a compromised hotspot, the attacker gets only garbage information. It goes only his malicious hotspot, but he cannot get anything that I'm sending. Unlike what's happening with VPN, he can go ahead, get all the information that I'm sending, tap it, and break it in the latest state, or act as a man in the middle, get a key, and break the information. With our key, he can not get anything. He cannot get any information that we send. Everything is garbage, and everything is going in multiple routes at the same time. And that is an idea how to overcome the compromised hotspot solution. Again, there are many companies that try to simply detect compromised hotspot. We don't care. We can live in the most untrusted environment and work safely. Because, again, we send little information on both ends, and none of them provides enough information to the hacker to get any information about what we send. Is this clear?
Mm-hmm. The next question I have is, when you talk about encryption, the people I've interviewed, and I think you said it earlier, even good encryption just sort of shifts the target to the encryption keys for the attackers. Now, right. Just wondering if there's maybe an analogy for what you guys do. I mean, if someone implements this, does it sort of shift the attack vector to something else, if that makes sense?
It makes sense. Yes, obviously, I tell you, I believe that our weakest point, if you may, is if someone will sit on your endpoint. If someone sits on my mobile phone and get access to all my data, who cares about encryption? Who cares about data on the move? So I believe that our weakest point, or the way to attack what we do, is to sit on the endpoint. But again, hey, I just started and say that there are hundreds of companies that try to protect the endpoint. So I believe that if you get the right company to protect the device, and you have us to protect you the move, data on the move, you are pretty safe here. So I believe this is the where it will go to the endpoint, trying to attack the endpoint, but this is anyhow what the attacker tries to do. So we just simply let me give you an example. Of course, just again, if you have today a bank, and in the bank you have a safe, you have a vault, and in the vault you have a gold, and you have all the security perimeters around this gold. One day or once a week, a Brinks machine, a Brinks car comes and takes the gold from one place to another. Where is the weakest link? The safe or the vault or the gold on the move? Obviously, the gold on the move will be the weakest point, and the attacker will wait for you there. So what we try to do is to use that terminology, but never gives the attack enough information to get. And by that, we again take I believe, the on point of how to. There's an infinite race, because what's happening today? You sit in your company and you know that you have you bought let's say security from one of the biggest companies. You pick one, and you know that on daily or weekly basis you get more and more events that security is being breached. So you need, in order to make your network more secure, you need to increase the security. How do you do that? You increase the hardware. You increase the hardware, you pay more money. You increase the hardware and you increase the length of the keys, and you make it a little bit more complicated to attacker to break the data. But again, 1 month or 2 months or even 1 year later, you need to upgrade the hardware, and you are at infinite race of protecting your security. This costs money, and this is the endless race. What we do, we say, hey, whatever you have, please keep using that. We will come with our solution, and this race will be ended. Once we are installed, we don't care about length of keyboard because there's no keys. We don't care about certificate authorities because there's nothing that we need for that. And we will use whatever you have inside your organization or your cell phone or your IoT to provide the security. So it's kind of, I would say, padding for closing security holes at the beginning. Later on, obviously, if you use security or you don't use security, our solution is totally secure. So we are immune to that. If you have VPN underneath or you have nothing, for us it's the same. But if you already invested in VPN or invested in any other security, that's fine. Go ahead and use it. We will help you to close the security holes and make your site or data or your cell phone more secure.
Yeah, and then I'm just wondering, obviously you guys are a fairly new company, just wondering like who you're targeting in terms of the customers. I mean, you mentioned banks and IoT. Is that sort of where you see this developing?
Yeah, yes, we currently started with the large enterprises, mainly telcos and finance, but we do work and talk to healthcare and defense and other verticals on the enterprise, mainly to protect site-to-site, database to database, the VLAN to VLAN, etc., between companies or between sites. But at the same time, we heavily work on the mobile market for, as you say, for public hotspot use cases, as you describe, or mobile banking. And we work with IoT as well, large IoT players as well, because we like, it's more business development, to assure that what we do can address the IoT as well. By the way, in IoT, if you go ahead and ask, one of the missing pieces, the largest one, is security, because the existing PKI is not applicable for that. So yes, we totally focus today on the enterprise. We do some development on the mobile, and the future, of course, will go to the IoT as well.
Wondering if I could get your thoughts on like the current encryption debate, because it seems like your company kind of fits in there a little bit. You know, Apple and Google have been criticized by law enforcement over their encryption, and now with the recent terror attacks in Paris, there's been a lot of debate about, you know, ISIS using encrypted information. And then, you know, obviously I look on your website and it says that, you know, your technology cannot be broken with unlimited computing power. So just wondering if you have any thoughts at all about kind of all the talk about encryption.
Yes, we have some thoughts. Again, I don't like to raise too much expectation on one hand, but on the other hand, look at what's happening in Europe today. Okay, what's happening in Paris, what's happening in Brussels. Think about that. Today, with some, I would say, basic communication, people found themselves attacking the cities and everybody afraid to go away. Think about 10 years from now, where everything will be connected to the internet, including the electricity and water, and all the other infrastructures. And now someone can attack that and shut down the entire city or country in one mouse click. That will be a disaster or a nightmare. So yes, it's not coming here to defend and protect the entire universe. This is nice, but that's not our promise. But what we can do, I believe, is to take slices, but very important ones, and protect them securely. And when we implemented that, I believe that provides security. Again, we don't today approach the consumer market. We don't approach people that like to connect cell phone to cell phone security. Again, maybe this is a nice market, but we don't believe today that this is the target market we need to approach. We go more to B2B vectors, and of course we target large companies that have many companies or partners or our customers, and through them we like to provide their customer partner with better security. But yeah, you know what, you see what's happening today, this raises a lot of questions, and these questions not only our questions, this is the country's questions, this is the government questions, and yes, I believe that to some of them we may find a nice solution. And moreover, I think the nice things, and one of the most important things in our technology, we can use any public infrastructure. You name it, public cloud. Nobody likes to use public cloud today. But again, if you took our technology, which is based on secret sharing, and you sent in secret sharing, by the way, we haven't discussed that, but in secret sharing, the basic idea is to take a data and split it into shares. Let's say 10 shares. And you can decide how many shares needs to reconstruct the data. So assuming you split any data into 10 shares, and 6 of them will be able to reconstruct back the data. So if you have only 5 shares, you can never, even with the all computer power in the world, to get even one bit of information. So if you just think about that, and you look at the verticals, and you say, hey, what is the most secure information I have? Will this be government? Will this be country? Will this be finance? Will this be healthcare? Hey, we can help you there. But you know what? If you look at Hollywood, people are afraid today to send movies over the net because people will attack them. So when you look at all these opportunities, I believe and like to believe that at least we have some nice opportunity to penetrate to some parts of the market and become a fairly dominant player.
Yeah, that's pretty much all the questions I have, unless there's anything else you want to add before we wrap up.
Let's now go back to your question about the name of the company and why it's called Secret Double Octopus. I tell you that what we do, on one hand, we take data, we spread it into shares, and we sell them on multiple routes to the other end. In the other end, we reconstruct back the data. So if you put your two hands once against each other, you have one octopus will be on your right hand. Of course, you spread the data and multiple routes, and the other hand will be the other octopus. So this is the double octopus, and the security is what we do between them. And this is the idea behind the company name. And when we try to talk to big companies about that and to show them what we do, I believe that one of the most important things that people ask us, can we still use whatever I have with your technology, or I need to replace it? And what we say loud and clear, whatever network or security configuration you have will work with us. And this is, I believe, guarantee that the investment that has been made already in CapEx and OpEx on this security and networking will remain. No need to throw away, no need to replace, no need to make a bad decision, and no need to throw good money after bad. We will work everywhere. And today, we install the software in big public companies and banks and service providers, and they use it smoothly. Again, we are still we are, as you say, we're a young company, but we already have product in testing in POCs in large public companies, and they all use that, use clouds, use channels, use it for database, use it for other stuff. And they look at it as a black box. You put something here, you get out get it out over the other end securely. And this looks like a miracle, but once you start to look at it, you play with it, you see that it works. And the only thing I like to tell you that I hope that more companies, of course, will jump on this new wave, understand that what they have today probably will come to its end soon, and we'll try to use the new paradigm shift security that we're providing with whatsoever application and data they have.
And that'll do it for this week's episode of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast. Big thanks to Raz Rafaeli for stopping by to talk about their security solution. The Cybercrime Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. If you're interested in learning more about the legal implications of a cybersecurity breach, check out the link in the podcast notes to Surfwatch Labs webcast on the topic. And if you enjoy this podcast, you can find more episodes on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites, as well as new episodes every Friday.